All right, welcome to the Cyber Kumite. I'm Tim Wainwright, and this is Chris Salerno. With us today is Anahi Santiago, healthcare CISO extraordinaire, and today's topic is recruiting firms. Today's Kumite is brought to you by our sponsor, Tricker Billings and Bloodsucker, the world's oldest executive search firm with offices in New York, London, Cairo, and Brasov. Ani, thanks for joining us today. Really happy to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So when we start this off and we start talking about recruiting, one of the things that always comes up, and I know I get a lot of emails from them, is recruiting firms. And so, Anahi, how do you use them today? Are they in your playbook?
They're absolutely in our playbook. I've been using recruiting firms now, really since I've been in a leadership role, and rely very heavily on them, primarily because so I've been in healthcare over 15 years. And what I found is that the internal recruiters in healthcare are clinically focused, and even those that are assigned to IT don't necessarily understand. They might understand clinical informatics and EHRs, but when it comes to the infrastructure and the security areas, they just aren't as strong as some of the recruiters that I work with.
Right, so they're focused on the provider's core competency, and generally speaking, they haven't been able to really understand what you're looking for in security candidates.
Not really. I think at one point in my career, I had one really good one. That's not to say that the ones that I work with are not good. They're just not, their expertise isn't in cybersecurity, and so. If I can get recruiters that are more specialists and understand the space, it's a lot easier to source talent.
Interesting. Are there any limitations you see when you're using these recruiting firms? Or are there things that they can't provide you and it's better off to kind of go a different route? Or is this the way to go?
This is the way that I go. Now, I'm also, I don't use 10 different recruiting firms. I have 3 that I find that I've been working with for over a decade that know me and that I find to be of value. So it's not like I answer every LinkedIn message from a recruiter informing them that they have a stellar candidate for my architect position that might be posted right now. Yeah. I really just source from very, the 3 firms. In terms of limitation, I think obviously there's a cost associated with it, which can be a challenge. And then there's also, I had one situation where I had an individual apply directly through the HR website, and then the recruiter also presented that. So there may be challenges in terms of timing. When did the person apply versus when did I see the resume from the recruiter? But I think that's only happened once. Yeah. And like I said, because I work with these firms, it's give and take. It's not like they treat me like, if at 10:03 a.m. I sent you the resume and the individual applied at 10:06, they're easy to work with.
Gotcha. So it really sounds like you've got a good relationship with them. And I think more than anything, it sounds like you've got the ability to tell them what you need, and they're pretty good at understanding where you're at with your kind of recruits now. And I think that's pretty good.
Yeah. So, and part of it is I've been working with them for so long that they already know what I'm looking for in terms of soft skills, in terms of the types of candidates. So it's not like they have to spend a lot of time asking me a ton of questions about what I look for in candidates and what I think is important. They kind of know it already and are able to then just dive into the technical components of the role.
So Ani, it sounds kind of frequent, and kind of one of my hesitations on the topic here is, when you get placements through recruiting firms, do they last? Are you finding people who are kind of joining the team and are also good cultural fits, or actually staying with your team for a while?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I mean, it hasn't been 100%. I think we've had a couple of misses, but even on those misses, when we first started working with the individual, we loved the individual. And then as time progressed, we learned things that I don't think a recruiter would have, whether an internal or an external recruiter would have been able to see it right off the bat, because we didn't see it for weeks, if not a couple months. But for the most part, it's been good. And yeah, it might sound like I use them a ton, but I'm really referring to the 15 years that I've been doing this, not necessarily even the 5 years that I've been.
Right. So, you and I were talking about this recently, and that's why I thought it would be fun to have you on and Kumite this thing a little bit. And by Kumite, we mean fight like marshmallows and fake debate, right? But I'm actually on the completely other end of this in terms of recruiters, and I've said they say never say never, but I've said I will never work with an outside recruiter. So I'm saying never. I feel really strongly about it because I feel like the recruiting ecosystem, that layer of our industry, is very disruptive, because I think that wherever a recruiter takes someone specialized from one team, they're placing it in another team for sure, but they're leaving a void. And I think that in a lot of situations, they're catalysts to move people around that are disrupting long-term capabilities in teams, especially when we're talking about senior people. And I also think, and you've clearly had a different experience, that recruiters sort of have an inherent conflict of interest. They want to place the position, but they've got to be tempted to place it with the available candidates that they have, people kind of who are on their rosters. And I'm not saying those candidates aren't good, but trying to, in some cases, and it doesn't sound like this has been as much your experience, but I'm afraid of them trying to fit, a square peg through a round hole by saying, oh no, this person will be good for this, especially knowing that in our industry, employment is so high, which we're all thankful for. It seems like, why do we need this layer of professional services to that are kind of constantly shuffling things around and disrupting the programs we're building?
Tim, is it
I think that's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah,
sorry, Chris.
No, that's okay. I was just going to clarify one of Tim's points there. Is it just the executive level that you don't see this working at, or is it the staff level? And maybe Anahi, you the same question after Tim.
I feel more strongly about the staff. Let's call anything but CISO level recruiting. Let's call that executive recruiting, and anything else is not. I actually feel that CISO level recruiting, the only downside to that is sometimes a notion that there's not already an heir apparent CISO in an organization if there's a position that needs to be filled. But sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the deputy CISO doesn't have the right type of executive skills to be the CISO. But I would say also that might be a failure of the organization, right? I know that executives in other roles who are groomed for other roles, C-level roles especially, they get special attention in a lot of organizations. They get training, they get coaching, they get certain things that maybe the deputy CISOs aren't getting necessarily, because the other division that I see is the CISO is often the person who is doing a lot of the communications, right? They're managing upward communications and downward communications. They're not always the core technologist in the security team anymore. And so if they're kind of managing the relationship with management, then the deputy CISO is often the person who is overseeing all of the other things that need to happen in the security program. And not a lot of that is upward facing. So how are they going to get that executive experience? And of course, they may not be ready for it. So since we sort of have that built in, and again, you can hear from me, I think the answer is to be able to provide more coaching to people who are in DCISO roles or associate CISO roles to be able to take that. But until we do that, I understand how in executive search, there may be need to bring in someone who's an experienced executive to a team that no longer has one. But on the staffing side, that's the part where I feel like the real disruption happens, right? Going around and saying, I need a cloud security architect, right? And then tearing one out of another organization through, a ridiculous comp proposition or promises about something else about the organization. This is going to make your dreams come true. You get to live in the Pacific Northwest, whatever it may be that you want to do, but the recruiter finding those right buttons and convincing them that they should go there, when in fact, maybe this is an individual who had trained in that organization, had a lot invested in them, and they probably otherwise would have been totally happy if they didn't get contacted on LinkedIn one day.
I mean,
Counter.
truth be told, when I got the call from an executive search firm for my current role, I wasn't looking.
Yeah.
I can't say I was super happy. I was wearing multiple hats, and I really would have rather all along to have just been focused on a CISO hat. But honestly, I took the interview just because I figured in a year I would want to start looking. So I wanted to get some interviews under my belt, but I had no intention of even leaving. And here I am 5 years later, quite thrilled that I actually took the interview.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that nobody should leave their post, right? I'm just suggesting, because the movement can be good, and individuals should continue to have opportunities in the organizations that they work in. And in fact, if they feel they don't know what the next move for them is, if they don't know what their next opportunity is, that's not being presented to them by their leadership, that's probably one of the best reasons to think about, should I still be here, or do I have a long-term path here if I don't know what's next and that's not being communicated to me. So in that situation, and even what you said, Ani, is, hey, you weren't sure what was next, and it made sense to talk to somebody when they contacted you. And that doesn't mean, and I don't mean to say too that, in my organization, we don't recruit people from other organizations. We do sometimes, but I will say it's not an emphasis, and we do it in-house. Our intent is to build our talent from within, and to have a culture that makes it with the communications and the opportunities ahead of them, that this is a place where they're going to want to stay for, hopefully much more than 2 years, more like 4, 5, 6. And then later after that, see themselves as even being able to have different opportunities beyond that, both technical and managerial. So that's something that Chris and I spent a lot of time communicating that type of track. But I also want to call back to what you said earlier. One of the advantages we have in doing that is security is our core competency. So our in-house recruiting, is part of our culture, knows exactly what we're looking for. They're recruiting for security. We just have it in-house. Whereas, as you said before, in the healthcare organizations, they often don't have someone who is that focused on that competency. They're focused on the core competency of the organization.
Well, yeah, and it also depends on the size of your organization. I mean, I actually just had somebody resign because he was able to get a job as a manager somewhere else. Mm-hmm. I just don't have a management position that I could have offered him. So sometimes, we're constrained. I mean, a great example is I deliberately chose to outsource the SOC because I don't have the luxury of training up SOC analysts and then being able to transition them somewhere else. And so why, part of my thinking in outsourcing the SOC is, why try and invest in a role that it's considered to be high turnover because of the burnout, because I'm not going to have a place to put them.
Yeah, that's interesting, Anahi. And let me go back to a point I think you were making there, and that's keeping talent at your organizations. Is there something that you can point to, if you had to name one thing or maybe two, that you can point to and say, this is what keeps talent here at our organization? Is there something that's really important to the folks that are on the team?
So I think that is a great question, and to highlight Tim's point from before about failure of an organization to communicate what the next steps are for your team members. I think what keeps people in an organization is knowing that you're investing in them, asking them what they want their next role to be, and then figuring out how to create opportunities for them, whether it's moving them sideways because they want to just get different experience in different domains of cybersecurity, or whether it's sending them to training, whether it's leadership training or technical training, so that they can continue to progress. I think one of the things that an organization fails at times is creating technical tracks as opposed to progressing people's careers into management, because not everybody that is in technology wants to be a manager and a leader. And so we shouldn't pigeonhole folks. But for me, it's making sure that we know and understand and are having active conversations about how our team members want to progress, investing in them, and then being really transparent about, you know, the career path, because there might be a point in time where we just don't have a place for them to go. But I've done this, and I know that others of my peers have done this, which is once we know that we really can't help progress somebody's career, making that phone call and talking to a peer about whether there's an opportunity. You know, there's actually a guy that works for you guys who at one point, a former leader picked up the phone and said to me, "This guy's great. I don't have a place for him. He'll do great in your organization." And I've done that too. And so demonstrating that to other team members also shows that you're invested in them in ways beyond just what can benefit Christiana Care.
Ani, I have another idea for you on recruiting, and I'm not going to try to convince you too hard to stop working with the trusted partners you have, because it clearly is working. It's working for you, probably, you know, better than I would expect. Before I get into that, one more word from our sponsor, Tricker, Billings, and Bloodsucker, the executive search firm boasting a millennia-long track record of placing high-performing pharaohs, Illuminati, and now cloud security architects. Great firm. I don't know if that's, you know, I don't know if that's one of the firms. Don't say if it is or not, because they've already paid for their sponsorship with nothing. So the idea I had for you, Ani, is something that Chris and I kicked around probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago. And we had an idea that it's possible that security leaders in the organization should take a more active role in recruiting. Now that may sound obvious at first until you hear some of the ideas of how that might take shape. Now, I think in most organizations, a CISO who is looking for directs and leadership positions in a security team are certainly going to be heavily involved in those activities, right? Talking to those candidates. But what if the CISO is also the person going to campus recruiting fairs? What if the CISO is taking time and showing up at collegiate campus competitions for cyber hacking, and going to B-sides and and a lot of CISOs do this. What if the time that CISOs spent at some of some conferences, some of the even the CISO level conferences, are also spending time kind of making connections with some of those potential future directs? And where I'm getting is, I think the CISO is uniquely positioned to inspire individuals to join their team at all levels, even all the way down to the campus level. So you talked about how in-house recruiting, especially if they're not focused on security, how could they do that? Of course, how could they do that? But the inverse of that is, who would be better than you, to go to campus? And I think, you're involved with your alma mater, and maybe you do this there. But I talk to a lot of CISOs who just kind of look at this and say, I expect another organization to bring in good candidates to me, and I'll sort them out from there. I remember I did this, I think this was 2 years ago. I went to one of the campuses that we recruit at, actually happens to be my alma mater. And that wasn't necessarily the reason why I went, but I stood in the career fair for a day and a half, or a full day there, and that's a long day. You talk to a lot of students, and then the next day doing interviews. And I must have talked to 80 plus students. And I met 5 that were special. Like, I met 5 that I thought to myself, if I wasn't here, or Chris, or one of our other directors, if we weren't here, we probably wouldn't have found them out of these 80. And we were able to hire 3 of them. And if I look back at how I spent my time, spending a day and a half to bring 3 people into the team was totally worth my time. Like, I've spent my time on way dumber stuff than that. And so to me, it's a challenge. If the CISO is willing to say, recruiting talent and overseeing talent and creating culture and communicating that is that important to my team, why aren't I involved with it top to bottom?
So I don't disagree with you at all. In fact, I think so. I look at it twofold. So I go to those career fairs.
Yeah.
I actually sit on it, and I've spent 2 days, at Temple on an annual basis. And I sit on advisory boards for 3 different college programs locally. in Philadelphia and New Jersey. And I am very active in things like the Women in Cybersecurity group, which has members from all disciplines, with the goal of, being able to not only network and meet new talent, but with the goal of increasing the amount of talent in cybersecurity. And so I do all these things, not just to be able to network and find talent for my own organization, but I think as CISOs, we have a duty to fix or help to fix the talent shortage. And we do that by talking to, in my opinion, middle school and high school kids and college kids, and sharing with them what it is that we do and why we think that cybersecurity is such an important and an important field where they can thrive. And so for me, it's twofold. It's even if I don't get anybody out into my team, if I can get those 5 people into the field, then I've done my part in helping to solve an ever increasing problem. And I think we as CISOs, all of us, have a responsibility. If we're complaining about the lack of talent, then we should be doing this. And I will tell you that even though I use recruiters, I also don't have a problem getting, people to apply for my roles. When I had a director position open, I had CISOs from other organizations, CIOs from other organizations apply for the position. And I believe it's because of the network that I've built, and of, all these different activities that hopefully build a good name and make us attractive as an organization.
Yeah, I love that. And I wish, you're taking a wide net approach, and you're using a lot of the tools and methods out there, including these independent recruiting firms, and it's part of your strategy. I think that makes a lot of sense, even if it doesn't become part of my strategy. One of the other things I think about on this topic is, we've thinking about this from the perspective of the recruitee. So the person who's got, the 4 to 5 years of golden technical security experience, or whatever that's particular skill we're looking for, and they're being contacted by recruiters. And we know this is constantly happening because it's a big industry, and it's just it's a constant bombardment. But I think about it from their perspective. Why would I change jobs just based on what this person is saying that I don't know? To me, it's like going into a restaurant, and this is one of my huge pet peeves, right? Going into a restaurant and like asking the waiter, hey, what do you like on the menu? Like maybe they hate seafood and you love it. Like you don't even know this person. And also they're like 17, they're like a teenager. Like they don't eat in restaurants like you do. Why would you ask that question? So it's like a total stranger coming to you and saying, hey, you would be happier over here. And sure, there's more money, but like that shouldn't be everything either. And so when I think about this from the perspective of someone who's being recruited, they should be thinking about, hey, if I don't think I'm going to be at this organization forever, I should be thinking about the type of organization that I want to work with and network and go to these events, go to some of the same things that I was talking about before, and meet people, meet your future peers. Don't wait for a stranger to come tell you that maybe it's going to be better somewhere else. Because you know what? It might not be, right? And they don't have, and this is where I get back to the conflict of interest. They don't have that much skin in the game once you've stayed there for, 60 days, 90 days, 6 months, whatever it is, they're going to move on. And I feel like that's one of the things that, while that doesn't happen every time, that's one of the reasons why I'm like, well, I just feel like we don't need this layer. But I hear how you're using it effectively, again, as part of your overall plan. So I think that's
depends. Yeah. Sorry, what I was going to say is, in a former role, I was also responsible for the entire IT department's recruiting relationships.
Oh, I didn't know that.
What's that?
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, it was a nightmare. Huh. But what I will assert is that the 3 firms that I work with, I trust, and they do it really well. There were about 20 other firms on that list that I would never do business with. Oh. And even though they email me, hey, remember me? No.
I do, and I never want to talk to you again.
Yeah. And my husband was actually placed into his current role with one of these firms.
Oh, now it's personal.
What's that?
I said, now it's personal.
Well, no, but what I've seen even with him is that the recruiter that placed him there, it's been over a year and has maintained a relationship with him, and they go out to lunch and they talk. And so what I've also seen is that the good firms don't just drop and roll. They actually retain relationships, not only with the individuals, but with their customers, to make sure that everybody's getting value out of the relationship. So it really depends on who you're working with.
Well, it sounds like, based on your experience, there's definitely some good guys in the space. So anyone listening to the Kumite today, feel free to reach out to us, reach out to Ani, and find out, what are some of the firms that she's had good success with, because certainly if they're doing it right, they should be recognized for that, and they should be the ones that you talk to. So Ani, thanks for joining us today. This was a lot of fun.
Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you taking the time out and go into blows with us on this. Not really, we don't fight that hard, but it's good to hear some opposing views here. So this is the Cyber Kumite once again. I'm Tim Wainwright, reminding you that I taught Chris Salerno everything that he knows.
And I'm Chris Salerno, and that very first thing was how to find a blank essay password. Thanks, everyone.